As everyone already knows, mutants were born from experiments by the race of cosmic entities known as Celestials. Millions of years ago, they experimented with the local primitive race, giving rise to the Eternals, the Deviants, and the Mutants. Mutants are known to be the next step in human evolution and take great pride in that. However, for those who've been following the channel for some time, you may have seen me comment on mutants with angelic and demonic characteristics. But how could this be possible if the Celestials experimented on humans? And there are even powerful demons with mutations, like the mutant demon Azazel, who resides in an infernal dimension and has tried to conquer the Earth. The answer is relatively simple. They're not demons and angels in the traditional sense. Azazel himself, who I mentioned, said that in biblical times there was a group known as the Cheyarafim, who are mutants with angelic characteristics. These Cheyarafim are natural enemies of the Nephim, who are mutants with demonic characteristics. The two groups engaged in a true holy war because of the fanatical worldview of the Cheyarafim, and as a consequence of the conflict, the Nephim were exiled to another dimension. It is not known for certain what happened to the Cheyarafim, as there are no longer any groups of them on Earth as there were in biblical times, with only the character Archangel as a representative. He possesses the same powers as the rest of the group, including wings, sonic screams, regeneration, and healing blood that can even harm the Nephim. The Nephim, in turn, remain exiled, and the representative on Earth is Azazel's son, Nightcrawler. The most accepted theory is that either the Cheyarafim were extinct in some confrontation, or they were gradually assimilated into human genetics over time. So, as mentioned before, they are not angels and demons, at least not in the most literal sense of the word, although they act as such. Azazel himself acts as a demon indeed, using magic, ruling over the Brimstorm dimension where his people were exiled, and even battling against Mephisto for the title of Satan. However, this confusion is actually quite common among humans of that era, not just between these two races, but also with the Eternals. Have you noticed that the Eternals have names similar to those of Greek gods? Athena is similar to Athena, the goddess of war. Icarus is similar to Icarus, and so on. That's because humans often mistook members of this race for the gods of the Olympian pantheon. But the Eternals didn't help much with that, did they? Besides their names, they built their base in Olympia, near the main nexus between Earth's dimension and that of the Olympian gods. For a while, this even caused conflict between the two races, as the Greek gods were not pleased with the adoration of the Eternals. However, they eventually established a pact of non-interference between them. Another detail worth mentioning is that mutations are not exclusive to individuals born on Earth. Logically, one might assume that since the Celestials conducted their experiments on Earth, only the planet would have mutants, but that's a mistaken notion. That's because the Celestials conducted experiments throughout the universe. In fact, they literally created planets and various races out there. Even the Beyonders have been considered their creations, but that's a story for another video. Although not very common, mutants from other races occasionally appear. For example, Skrull mutants have been taught by Professor Xavier to harness their powers. A more recent example, which is currently sparking debates in Marvel forums, is Kamala Khan, the new Miss Marvel. The reason for the debate is that she was detected by Cerebro as a mutant, but at the same time she's an Inhuman, something that mutants would consider impossible. That's because the Inhumans were not created by the Celestials, but rather through experiments by the Kree to genetically evolve. However, as I mentioned, all of this is very recent, and even Miss Marvel's mutant powers have not been fully showcased. As Professor Xavier mentioned, perhaps they may not even manifest due to the Terrigen Mist in her system. The Terrigen Mists are responsible for granting powers to the Inhumans and are fatal to mutants, which makes Kamala a unique being. In theory, she shouldn't have even survived the process. Another character who's a hybrid is Namor, but in his case is easier to understand, as he's both an Atlantean and a mutant. This is because his father was a human who married the Atlantean princess, but his father carried a dormant X gene that awakened in Namor, creating the mutant Atlantean hybrid. However, these hybrids are here on Earth. Another character I can mention is Adam X, a mutant Shi'ar hybrid with the ability to burn enemies from the inside out. Others include Davis Cameron, also a mutant Shi'ar, Namarita, and Noah, both mutant Atlanteans, Pixie, a mutant fairy hybrid, and Tyr, a mutant Asgardian hybrid. Most of these characters don't have very developed backgrounds, so it's difficult to know how they actually came to be hybrids. The most logical assumption is that at some point they interacted with mutants or humans with the latent X genes on Earth. In addition to hybrid mutants, there are mutant subspecies that are no longer seen in the comics. Besides the Cheyarafim and Neophim, one I can mention here are the Neo. They are an ancient race that may be even more powerful than mutants, as seen in how they regard mutants as inferior. They had a brief moment of humanity after the High Evolutionary temporarily stripped them of their powers. However, even in that short time span, many perished. Within the Neo, there's another subgroup known as the Shockwave Riders, who utilize anti-gravity devices and consist of individuals with mental powers. There are also the Lost Souls, who psychically trap souls near death, causing them eternal despair. These various groups were portrayed as legends among mutants, with even Apocalypse showing them respect. Other subraces include the Changelings and the Externals, but they haven't been developed enough to comment much, with the Changelings only having a brief encounter with Hulk in one issue. Anyway, despite the video extending beyond the initial question, I believe I've made it clear that mutants extend far beyond what we typically see. I would even say that it might take a while before we see these other mutant subgroups again because it all gets too confusing. So it's much easier to pretend that none of this happened and that mutants are just those who are part of the X-Men or their enemies. Since 2018, the origin story of mutants and the Celestials who came to Earth has been constantly changing, making it difficult to predict the fate of the race. Just to give you an idea, it was shown in the war between the Eternals and the X-Men that mutants are actually deviants and not two separate races, as deviants can traverse the Krakoa portal that only mutants are allowed to enter.